It was a typical Friday night in Austin, Texas. December 6, 1991. Just before midnight, a police patrolman was driving by a local frozen yogurt shop called I Can't Believe It's Yogurt. Everything seemed quiet at first, but then he noticed something out of place. Smoke was coming from the shop. Without delay, he reported the fire. When firefighters arrived and extinguished the flames, they were not prepared for the horrifying scene they would discover. Inside the burned remains of the shop were 4 bodies, the remains of young girls who had suffered unimaginable brutality before their lives were taken. The victims were Amy Ayers, just 13 years old, her sister Jennifer Harbison, 17, along with Jennifer's best friend Eliza Thomas, also 17, and Sarah Harbison, Jennifer's younger sister, who was only 15. These were ordinary girls, with plans, dreams, and a future ahead of them, but in one cruel night, all of that was taken away. The fire had been set to cover up what had been done to them, but the flames could not hide the brutal reality. 3 of the girls, Jennifer, Eliza, and Sarah, were found together, their bodies nude, gagged, and bound with their own underwear. Each had been shot execution style, a single .22 caliber bullet to the head. Their bodies were severely charred, but the evidence of the horror they had experienced was still there. Amy Ayers was found in a different part of the shop. Her body wasn't as badly burned, but she had endured something equally horrific. She had been shot twice. The first bullet missed her brain, but the second caused severe damage, destroying part of her skull and exiting through her jaw. Even more tragically, Amy had suffered burns on 25 to 30% of her body before she died. The investigation into the yogurt shop murders began immediately. The community was in shock. No one could comprehend who would commit such an atrocity or why. The initial investigation produced numerous persons of interest, but none led to solid arrests. At one point, a 15-year-old boy caught with a .22 caliber gun at a nearby mall raised suspicions. The detectives thought they might be onto something when the boy offered up the names of 3 friends, but under intense questioning, it became clear that none of the boys were involved. Their stories didn't hold up, and they were eliminated as suspects. As the case dragged on without resolution, it seemed that justice might never be found. Years passed, and the community held on to hope that the murderer, or murderers, would be caught. Then, years after the crime, new detectives were assigned to the case. They looked back at the group of boys who had been questioned in 1991. By this time, those boys had grown into men: Robert Springsteen, Michael Scott, Maurice Pierce, and Forrest Wellborn. The detectives decided it was worth pursuing these men as potential suspects once again. In a series of interrogations, 2 of the men, Robert Springsteen and Michael Scott, confessed to participating in the murders. Their confessions were chilling, detailed accounts of how they had tied up the girls and set the fire to destroy the evidence. Springsteen and Scott were tried and convicted, despite the fact that there was no physical evidence connecting them to the crime scene. Their confessions were enough to send them to prison, one sentenced to death, the other to life in prison. But even after the convictions, something didn't sit right. The confessions had come after intense and lengthy interrogations, and there were questions about the methods used to obtain them. Some feared the men had been coerced into admitting to crimes they didn't commit. Then, in 2009, a breakthrough came. New DNA testing on evidence from the scene revealed that the DNA found on one of the victims didn't match any of the 4 men accused of the crime. Not Springsteen. Not Scott. Not Pierce or Wellborn. The DNA belonged to someone else, someone still unidentified. With this new forensic evidence, the convictions of Springsteen and Scott were overturned. They were released from prison, their names cleared of the murder convictions, but the question still remained: if they didn't do it, who did? Despite the overturned convictions and the new DNA evidence, no new arrests have been made. The yogurt shop murders remain unsolved, and the families of Amy, Jennifer, Eliza, and Sarah are still waiting for answers. Whoever committed this atrocity remains at large, their identity still unknown. The case has left deep scars on the city of Austin. For over 3 decades, the memory of that horrific night has lingered, a constant reminder that justice hasn't been served. And to this day, no one knows exactly who was responsible for the deaths of those 4 innocent girls. All that remains are unanswered questions, and a cold case that still haunts the city. Thank you for watching. If you want to hear more stories like this, subscribe to the channel.